Michael, Emily, and their baby will live here with me.
Robert proudly made his bold declaration, standing tall with confidence. Behind him, Michael and Emily stood, casting malicious smiles in my direction. How can they act so selfishly? I felt dizzy, but more than anything, I couldn't stand the thought of my happiness being threatened. Perhaps my feelings showed on my face. Michael insulted me.
If you oppose us, don't expect me to take care of you.
I never raised my son to act like this, and I regretted how things had turned out. Still, pretending to take the bait from such a cheap provocation, I firmly declared, "Then I'll leave." Everyone froze, staring at me with astonished expressions, clearly not expecting my reply. Robert snapped out of it first, pointing at me and yelling angrily,
You leave? If you do that, you'll end up homeless. If you think you can threaten me, I'm not falling for it.
The sweat on Robert's forehead betrayed the fact that his words were mere bravado. Seeing this, I made a point to look him straight in the eye with a bold and unwavering demeanor. My name is Grace, and I'm a 53-year-old remote worker. After starting my career, I met my husband, Robert. We dated for a few years before getting married. Not long after we got married, I became pregnant and gave birth to a healthy baby boy. That boy is my son, Michael, who is now married with kids of his own. When I first met Robert, he was incredibly kind and always thoughtful toward me. However, a few years into our marriage, his attitude started to change. After I left my job to become a stay-at-home mom following Michael's birth, Robert began treating me coldly and, at times, harshly. I considered divorce multiple times, but with Michael being so young, I couldn't bring myself to go through with it. I believe that raising a child required teamwork, but that ideal was easily shattered. When Michael cried at night, Robert would click his tongue in frustration, and when my lack of sleep left me unable to prepare his breakfast, he shouted at me first thing in the morning. Despite living that way, I couldn't help but look forward to watching Michael grow up. When Michael was old enough to understand and speak, I eagerly anticipated whether he would call out to me or Robert first, and I ended up being the winner. When Robert realized this, he started actively engaging with Michael, wanting to be noticed more. For example, he would entertain Michael while I was cooking, and even took the initiative to bathe him. As a result of Robert's efforts, Michael began mimicking him, much to my dismay. Once Michael became more independent, he grew increasingly mischievous. When I scolded him for his behavior, he would imitate Robert and hurl rude remarks at me. When I told Michael to clean up his toys after playing, he would respond like this.
Shut up. If you want me to clean it up so badly, ask me properly.
When I sternly scolded Michael face to face, he would reluctantly clean up with a dissatisfied look, but soon enough, he'd do the same thing again. Fearing he'd grow into a child who would inconvenience others, I turned to Robert for advice.
Boys need to have this kind of energy. He'll get it together once he's out in the real world.
However, he would dismiss it with such a cliché response. As a result of Robert's continued leniency, Michael grew up remaining as mischievous as ever. Raising him involved countless struggles that words can't fully capture, but I still managed to see him through to college graduation. It seemed that neither Robert nor Michael truly understood the hardships I endured, and I continued to feel unfairly burdened even as Michael moved out to live on his own. To be honest, I felt a sense of relief, as though a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders. With Michael gone, Robert and I returned to living alone in our house. Until now, Michael's presence had kept me from noticing Robert's flaws. However, in the suddenly quiet house, Robert's flaws became especially noticeable. Robert's attitude hadn't changed much since the early years of our marriage, but facing his unreasonable behavior directly after so long began to take a toll on my mental well-being. One day, when I was nearing my limit, Michael brought a young woman home to introduce to us. He told us she was his partner and that they would be getting married soon. I was overjoyed to think that Michael, who had been nothing but mischievous, was now getting married. Michael's partner was named Emily. She appeared strong-willed but had a gentle demeanor and was incredibly polite. For a moment, I thought she seemed too good for Michael, but if she chose him, I had no complaints. Robert also approved of their marriage right away. Although Michael and Emily planned to continue living in their current apartment and not with us, the thought of having a livelier family still made me happy. Things might get tough from here on out, so feel free to rely on me anytime. Until now, they had each been living on their own, but from now on, they would live together. I knew there would be challenges ahead, and I wanted to support them. That was my only intention when I said those words. However, after they got married, Michael and Emily started coming over constantly. At first, I was happy, but each time they came over, they would eat from morning to night, occupy the living room, and, when joining me for shopping, sneak unnecessary items into the cart. It became a routine for them to have me pay for the extra items and then leave in a hurry, and I gradually grew weary of Michael and Emily. After some time, when they suddenly stopped visiting as often, I received a surprising call.
Hey, guess what? We had a baby.
On the other end of the sudden phone call, Michael happily announced the news. Thrilled about our first grandchild, Robert and I immediately joined in congratulating him.
That's amazing, Michael. So, when's the due date?
What are you talking about? I said we had a baby. I'm calling from the hospital.
To our astonishment, Michael wasn't announcing Emily's pregnancy, but rather that she had already given birth. In a rush, we hurried to the hospital to see our grandchild for the first time. After this whirlwind of events, Michael and Emily started visiting us frequently again. I was happy to see my grandchild, but Michael and Emily often left me to take care of their baby while they went out. Eventually, it became routine for them to hand their baby off to me with comments like,
"Grace, just give her formula. Thanks so much."
We're so lucky to have you, Mom. It's great to have someone to rely on when we go out.
By this time, I had already started working from home. When Michael brought Emily to meet us before their wedding, I had proposed to Robert that we move out of the house.
What are you talking about? If we do that, where will we live?
When Robert immediately started complaining, I quickly countered with a new proposal. "Let's build a new house. Don't worry, I'll work from home to help. My parents are getting older, so I think it's time for them to live with us. We can give this house to Michael and Emily and start fresh in a new home. Since living together would require a house with adequate space and layout, I convinced Robert that by combining his income with mine, we could reach our financial goal. Reluctantly, he agreed, and I immediately started working from home. Ever since then, no matter how often I was left to care for my grandchild or how many unreasonable outbursts Robert had, I never neglected my work-from-home job. As those days went by, the time finally came for my dream to come true. Robert, though reluctantly, had agreed to save money for a new house where we could live with my parents. However, unless I pushed him, he rarely made any effort to cooperate, and I had to endure more unreasonable behavior from him along the way. Still, when we finally reached our financial goal, none of that mattered anymore. Robert, we finally made it. I'm going to talk to my parents and move things forward. We had talked about the new house often, but now we could finally have a proper discussion with my parents involved. Leaving Robert, who gave me a half-hearted response, I went to meet my parents. Even though Michael and Emily kept visiting unexpectedly, the thought of soon living in a new house with my parents brightened my spirits. As my work progressed smoothly, we were finally able to purchase the ideal house I had dreamed of. I informed Robert about it, and we were both excited as we looked forward to the handover day. On the day of the handover, just as I was about to step into the new house with excitement, a moving truck suddenly pulled up. As I stood there, stunned and watching the situation unfold, the movers began unloading items, so I quickly rushed to stop them. I hadn't heard anything about this, and since neither my parents' belongings nor ours had been moved in yet, I had no idea whose things they were trying to bring into the house. Both the movers, confused by being stopped, and I, equally bewildered, stood there trying to make sense of the situation. As we struggled to understand what was happening, a loud voice suddenly rang out from somewhere.
What do you think you're doing?
The voice belonged to Robert. Relieved to hear someone stepping in to stop the situation, I turned around, only to realize that those words were directed at me. Robert dismissed me with a wave of his hand, as if I were in the way, while Michael and Emily greeted the movers. Then Robert walked up to me and declared proudly,
Michael, Emily, and their baby will live here with me.
Robert proudly made his bold declaration, standing tall with confidence. Behind him, Michael and Emily stood, casting malicious smiles in my direction. How can they act so selfishly? I felt dizzy, but more than anything, I couldn't stand the thought of my happiness being threatened. Perhaps my feelings showed on my face. Michael insulted me.
If you oppose us, don't expect me to take care of you.
I never raised my son to act like this, and I regretted how things had turned out. Still, pretending to take the bait from such a cheap provocation, I firmly declared, "Then I'll leave." Everyone froze, staring at me with astonished expressions, clearly not expecting my reply. Robert snapped out of it first, pointing at me and yelling angrily,
You leave? If you do that, you'll end up homeless. If you think you can threaten me, I'm not falling for it.
The sweat on Robert's forehead betrayed the fact that his words were mere bravado. Seeing this, I made a point to look him straight in the eye with a bold and unwavering demeanor. However, my stance seemed futile as Robert smirked, regaining his composure.
That's right. I'm the owner of this house. That was the agreement, wasn't it?
It's true that the new house is in Robert's name. But the purpose of building it was to live with my parents, and there were other conditions attached. Even so, I couldn't understand why Robert was acting so confidently. When I first brought up the idea of building the house with my parents in mind, Robert naturally mentioned Michael. He argued that it made more sense to build the house for Michael and Emily, as they would likely live longer than my parents. While his reasoning was valid, I wanted them to achieve that on their own. So I persisted, patiently convincing Robert until he reluctantly agreed. That's why the new house was designed with a layout tailored for my parents, incorporating as many accessible features as possible. Since marrying Robert, I hadn't had many enjoyable moments. But now that Michael was married, I felt it was finally time to live my life the way I wanted. I had spent so much time on Robert and Michael, neglecting my parents in the process. For me, this was the time to finally repay them. As I was lost in these thoughts, I must have been glaring at them, because Robert noticed and sneered at me.
What's with that smug look? Got nothing to say now that I've hit the mark.
His words infuriated me. Over the years, I'd heard countless hurtful things, and though I'd been angry, I always ended up letting it go. But this time, I couldn't let it slide. Even when Robert, who had been kind at the start of our marriage, changed his attitude drastically. Even when Michael was born and started mimicking Robert, hurling harsh words at me, or when Robert would get angry, yell, throw tantrums, or ignore me depending on his mood. Even when Emily treated me with obvious disrespect or pushed childcare responsibilities onto me, I patiently endured it all. But this time, it wasn't just about me. It involved my parents too. To think they were trying to take over so easily was unthinkable. For once, I couldn't contain my anger, and I had no intention of holding back anymore. Enough is enough. This house was supposed to be for me, my parents, and you to live in. Sure, for convenience, the house is in your name, and for some reason, the payments are coming out of Michael's account, but I'm the one who made all the preparations to build it. Yes, the condition when building this house was that the ownership would be in Robert's name. I understood that much. It made sense that it would look better to others that way, but for some reason, the mortgage payments were being handled through Michael. Robert insisted it was because he wanted it to appear that Michael had bought the house as an act of devotion to his grandparents. He insisted that it would make it seem like Michael was being dutiful to his grandparents, but I couldn't understand the reasoning behind it. However, for me, as long as I could live with my parents, I didn't care what form it took. So even though it didn't sit well with me, I agreed. At the time, I never imagined it would lead to this. When I noticed Robert, Michael, and Emily all smirking in the same way as I made my case, I realized the truth. Robert had planned from the start to take this house for himself. I had been nothing more than a worker, collecting materials and laboring to build the nest for someone else. When the house was finished, and the time finally came to move in, the realization of what had happened broke my patience completely. At that moment, I presented Robert with the divorce papers I had secretly kept hidden for years. I had prepared them over a decade ago. Back when Michael started high school, he went away for a few days on a sports camp trip. With the rare chance to relax, Robert and I decided to go out for dinner. During the outing, we ran into one of Robert's co-workers and had a casual chat for a while. The conversation went on longer than expected, prompting Robert's coworker to hurriedly try to wrap it up. But what Robert said next was absolutely appalling.
It's fine. Don't worry about it at all. Having dinner with her is just a hassle. But I'm such a kind husband that I'm humoring her. I didn't even bother to make a reservation. Honestly, I might just send her home and go out for drinks instead. Looking at her old face is enough to make me sick.
Hearing this, the coworker's face froze, and they made an awkward exit as quickly as possible. I was completely stunned by the cruel remarks Robert had blurted out in public. More than shocked, I was almost in a state of panic. Even so, I pretended nothing had happened and went through with the dinner, but I couldn't even remember how the food tasted. The very next day, I went to the courthouse to get the divorce papers. When I presented the divorce papers, Robert looked surprised for a moment, but quickly broke into a sly grin.
Well prepared, aren't you? You really understand your place, don't you?
Oh my. Have you finally realized your position? I thought you might catch on sooner, but it's good we made it this far. And understanding that you're no longer needed. How clever of you.
Exactly. Mom, you totally get it. Now keep working harder and pay for our house, okay?
All three of them laughed while looking down on me, and Michael snatched the divorce papers out of my hand. He handed them to Robert, who began filling them out while humming a tune. From his attitude, it was clear that Robert didn't remember anything, not just what he said back then, but any of the terrible things he'd done to me over the years. In fact, he might even start claiming that he hadn't done anything wrong at all. Once he finished, Robert grinned smugly and waved the completed divorce papers in front of me. I quickly grabbed them, stuffed them into my bag, and pulled out my phone. I opened the recording app and held it out in front of them.
Oh, Grace. How scary. Recording evidence for the divorce now. It's far too late for that.
Ignoring Emily's condescending smirk, I turned to Robert and clarified a few things. No alimony or division of assets, and don't contact me ever again.
Fine.
If you ever contact me directly, I'll hire a lawyer and sue for damages.
Yeah.
In response to my statements, Robert gave nothing but half-hearted replies, all while continuing to grin. I couldn't understand how someone could become so brazenly shameless. Suppressing the anger rising within me, I turned to Michael and spoke firmly. And Michael, now that my marriage is over, I'm cutting ties with you as well. We're no longer parent and child.
Yeah, sure.
You've both given your answers, right? Then I'm done here. I don't think we'll ever meet again, so take care of everything yourselves. With that, I stopped the recording and decided to leave. It seemed that neither Robert, Michael, nor Emily had any idea what was about to happen to them. Without anyone stopping me, I went straight to the court to file my divorce papers. 3 days after I finished filling out and submitting the divorce papers, I was packing up for the move with my parents when I received a call from Robert. Even though I had told him just recently that I'd hire a lawyer and demand damages if he contacted me, he was now calling me anyway, clearly desperate for some reason. However, since we were already divorced, his problems were no longer my concern. Busy with my packing, I decided to ignore the call. As soon as Robert's call ended, another call came in, this time from Michael. The fact that both of them were contacting me suggested something serious was happening, but I couldn't have cared less. I ignored both calls and continued my work, but their constant ringing made it hard to focus. Thinking I had no choice, I answered when Robert called again, and the first thing I heard was his pitiful voice.
Help me. The bank and Michael won't stop calling me.
With that one sentence, I immediately understood the situation Robert and Michael were in. I let out a sigh of exasperation and replied to him wearily, "I don't care. It has nothing to do with me anymore." In response, Robert yelled at the top of his lungs.
Heartless woman.
Hearing him say that was laughable. Considering the situation they'd brought upon themselves, blaming me was ridiculous. To be honest, I no longer cared what happened to them. By the way, do you remember the promise we made just the other day? I sighed loudly, making sure he could hear it, and decided to bring it up. Of course, it was already too late for Robert since he had broken our agreement by contacting me.
What promise?
As expected, he had completely forgotten, and I couldn't help but laugh inwardly. I told you that if you contacted me, I'd hire a lawyer and demand damages.
I never heard that.
Even if you weren't paying attention, I clearly said it, and you agreed.
No, I didn't. There's no way I'd agree to something so ridiculous.
Robert vehemently denied it, but I had anticipated this. That's why at the time, I made sure to record everything using the recording app. I have it recorded, so you can't talk your way out of this.
What? Please forgive me. If this continues, both Michael and I will be out on the streets.
In an even weaker voice than when he first called, Robert pleaded with me desperately. But after everything he had done, there was no way I could forgive him. Absolutely not. I'm going to consult a lawyer now. I firmly rejected him, but as always, Robert only heard what he wanted to and continued to beg.
Let's get back together. Please.
Hearing such nonsense, I coldly retorted without any sympathy. Save your nonsense for when you're dreaming. I was surprised at how low and firm my voice sounded as I flatly rejected him without a hint of sympathy. Then, I immediately hung up and blocked Robert's number to ensure he couldn't contact me again. I thought that would be the end of any contact from Robert, and felt relieved as I prepared to resume packing. But just as I did, my phone rang again. Wondering what it could be this time, I checked the screen and saw Michael's name displayed. I had nearly forgotten about him after dealing with Robert earlier, but Michael was probably also being hounded by calls from the bank. He would cry at me like Robert did. While I considered ignoring the call, I decided to answer, thinking it might be a good opportunity to teach him a lesson about responsibility.
Mom, please help me. The bank has been calling me nonstop, and Dad won't pick up his phone.
His pitiful voice, filled with desperation, made me wonder how far he had to sink before he learned his lesson. Hearing the same thing twice in one day had worn me out, and I didn't want to deal with it any further. To keep things brief, I sent Michael the recorded audio before he could say anything more. "That's the kind of person your father is. I've just sent you an important recording, so listen to it carefully and understand. With that said, don't contact me again. You and I are strangers now." Michael started yelling something on the other end, but I didn't bother to listen and hung up. Then, just like with Robert, I blocked Michael's number and went back to packing. After finishing the initial round of packing, I went to a law firm. I explained everything that had happened and decided to file claims for damages against Robert, Michael, and of course, Emily. Honestly, I considered going easy on Michael and Emily since they had a child, but after reflecting on everything they had done, I couldn't forgive them. I also hoped this would serve as an opportunity for them to learn about the harsh realities of life. So I filed the claims without holding back. As a result, Robert's actions came to light at his workplace. He was demoted and had his salary reduced. Unable to endure the shame, he eventually resigned voluntarily. According to what I heard from my lawyer, Robert is now juggling multiple day jobs to pay the damages owed to me. As for Michael and Emily, their failed scheme led to a massive fight between them. It seems that Emily was the one who brought up the idea of divorce. However, with a child to care for and unable to handle the burden of paying the damages on her own, she decided to abandon the idea of divorce. Although they've managed to maintain the appearance of a marriage, their home life is undoubtedly cold and strained. I couldn't help but laugh at how much Michael was starting to resemble Robert in the worst ways. Of course, Michael's part in the fiasco also got him fired from his job. Now both he and Emily are working multiple jobs to scrape together the money for the damages. As for me, I moved back to my parents' house and told them everything that had happened. We also discussed the future and decided I would continue living with them. Together, we started renovating the house to make it more comfortable for the three of us. While the renovations are underway, we've moved into temporary housing. Since my divorce, I've felt completely liberated, and thankfully, my work has been recognized, resulting in an increase in income. From now on, I'll work harder than ever and build a happy life for myself. Spending time with my parents is the greatest source of happiness for me right now.